Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thorne's hands moved with deadly precision as she adjusted her scope through the shattered window of the abandoned warehouse. 3 miles away, across the sprawling industrial district of Meridian City, 12 Navy SEALs lay pinned down in a terrorist compound with no hope of extraction. Their communications were down, air support was grounded by heavy anti-aircraft fire, and enemy reinforcements were closing in from all directions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What the crisis command team at Fort Kestrel didn't know was that the woman they'd relegated to cleaning weapons in the armory basement for the past 8 months was about to attempt the most audacious rescue shot in special operations history. The same woman they'd dismissed as just another desk jockey and forced into menial duties was Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thorne, callsign, Ghost, the most decorated sniper in Delta Force history. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if stories of hidden heroes and shocking revelations grip you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have an even more unbelievable story that will completely change how you think about the people around you. The shot Alexis was about to attempt would either save 12 of America's most elite warriors or expose the military's most closely guarded secret, that their greatest sniper had been hiding in plain sight, scrubbing rifle barrels and organizing ammunition while her brothers in arms faced impossible odds around the world. The margin for error was absolute zero. The consequences of failure were catastrophic. But Alexis had been preparing for this moment through 18 months of humiliation, dismissal, and forced invisibility. 6 hours earlier, the crisis had erupted when terrorist leader Karim Nazari and his Red Serpent organization had seized the Meridian chemical processing plant, taking 47 civilian hostages and threatening to release deadly toxins into the city's water supply. The facility's location in the heart of the industrial sector made conventional assault impossible. Too many civilians, too much collateral damage potential, and too many ways for the terrorists to trigger a chemical catastrophe that could kill thousands. SEAL Team Neptune had been inserted under cover of darkness to neutralize the threat quietly, but their mission had gone catastrophically wrong when they triggered a sophisticated alarm system that Nazari had installed throughout the compound. Now they were trapped in the facility's eastern wing, facing overwhelming numbers with dwindling ammunition and no way out. At Fort Kestrel's Joint Operations Command Center, General Patricia Hawthorne stared at the tactical display with growing desperation. Every conventional option had been exhausted. Airstrikes were impossible due to the chemical hazard. Ground assault would result in mass civilian casualties. The SEALs were on their own, and time was running out. "Sir," called Major David Reynolds from his position at the communications station, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Neptune lead reports they're down to their last magazines. Nazari's forces are massing for a final assault. We're looking at total mission failure and potential loss of the entire team." General Hawthorne's jaw tightened as she studied the satellite imagery. The compound was a fortress surrounded by open ground that offered no cover for rescue forces. The SEALs were trapped in a building that had become their tomb, facing odds that no amount of training could overcome. What nobody in the command center knew was that their solution was 3 floors below them, in the armory basement where Alexis Thorne was methodically cleaning M4 carbines while monitoring the crisis through her concealed radio earpiece. The woman they saw as invisible. Support staff was analyzing the tactical situation with the mind of someone who had spent 8 years executing impossible missions for the most classified unit in the American military. Alexis understood the geometry of the compound better than anyone in the command center because she had been there before. 2 years ago, during her final mission with Delta Force's Alpha Squadron, she had conducted reconnaissance of the Meridian chemical plant as part of a counter-terrorism assessment. She knew every sight line, every structural weakness, and most importantly, she knew the one shooting position that could reach the compound's interior, the abandoned grain elevator. On Meridian's south side offered a direct line of sight into the chemical plant's main processing floor, a shot of exactly 2.7 miles through industrial haze, thermal updrafts from the facility's cooling systems, and crosswinds that changed direction every few minutes. It was the kind of shot that existed in the theoretical realm of ballistics textbooks, not in the practical world of combat operations, but Alexis had made impossible shots before. During her 8 years with Delta Force, she had earned a reputation that bordered on mythical. The terrorist leader in Kandahar who died from a bullet that traveled through 3 buildings. The hostage rescue in Somalia where she eliminated 4 targets simultaneously with shots that defied physics. The arms dealer in Belgrade who never saw the bullet coming from a position that surveillance experts had declared impossible to access. Her military record was so classified that most of it existed only as redacted files in Pentagon basements. Even her own family believed she had spent 8 years as a logistics coordinator, pushing paperwork and managing supply chains. The truth was that Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thorne had been Delta Force's most effective operator, a ghost who appeared when conventional solutions failed and disappeared without leaving traces. That reputation had made her powerful enemies within the military hierarchy. Colonel Marcus Steele, the ambitious Fort Kestrel base commander, had orchestrated her downfall through a carefully planned campaign of character assassination and manufactured evidence. Jealous of her success and threatened by her unorthodox methods, Steele had convinced his Pentagon contacts that Alexis was becoming a liability, too independent, too willing to question orders, too dangerous to remain in active special operations. The official reason for her reassignment to Fort Kestrel had been administrative restructuring and career development. The reality was exile disguised as promotion, a dead-end position designed to push her toward early retirement. For 18 months, she had endured the humiliation of being treated as clerical support, watching from the sidelines as missions failed that she could have completed blindfolded. Now, as she listened to the desperate communications from Neptune team and watched the tactical situation deteriorate, Alexis faced the most important decision of her career. She could maintain her cover, continue playing the role of invisible support staff, and watch 12 elite warriors die because their commanders didn't know they had the world's most capable sniper organizing bullets in their basement. Or she could reveal herself, break 18 months of careful concealment, and attempt a shot that would either save Neptune team or expose the military's most closely guarded secret to a world that wasn't ready for the truth about America's shadow. Warriors. The choice she was about to make would change everything, not just for the trapped SEALs facing certain death in Meridian City, but for every assumption the military had made about capability, gender, and what was possible when the impossible became the only option left. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What the officers at Fort Kestrel didn't know about the woman quietly maintaining their weapons was that Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thorne had once been the military's most classified asset. To them, she was simply maintenance. Specialist Thorne, a reassigned officer, who'd been shuffled into support duties after what everyone assumed was a career derailment. The kind of person who cleaned rifles while real soldiers fought wars. They called her Basement Betty behind her back, a nickname that stuck from her first week in the armory when Colonel Marcus Steele had made his opinion crystal clear during the morning briefing. "Looks like they've sent us another paper pusher who couldn't cut it in the real military," he'd announced to the assembled staff, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that characterized Fort Kestrel's toxic leadership. Culture. Hope she's better at organizing supply closets than whatever got her transferred here. The comment had drawn knowing chuckles from the other officers, the kind of dismissive laughter that came from people who'd never questioned their own assumptions about competence and capability. Alexis had absorbed the mockery with the same emotionless expression she'd maintained through countless hostile briefings in forward operating bases where her very presence had challenged fragile egos and established hierarchies. She'd learned long ago that revealing her true background would only make things worse. The military special operations community was a small world where reputations preceded individuals by years, and her reputation was radioactive. Too many successful missions that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Too many dead terrorists whose elimination had never appeared in after-action reports. Too many impossible shots that existed only in classified files that most people would never see. But more dangerous than her operational record was what it represented, proof that the military's most fundamental assumptions about gender, capability, and combat effectiveness were wrong. Alexis Thorne wasn't just a highly effective operator. She was a walking contradiction to everything the old guard believed about who belonged in special operations and what women could accomplish when given the opportunity. Colonel Steele had orchestrated her downfall precisely because she represented a threat to his worldview and his career prospects. In his mind, special operations belonged to men like him, traditional warriors, who'd earned their positions through conventional channels and maintained their authority through institutional politics. The idea that a woman could outperform his hand-picked operators while operating under rules that he'd never had to follow was intolerable. During her first month at Fort Kestrel, Alexis had tried to maintain some semblance of her professional identity. When Major Reynolds had mentioned struggling with long-range ballistics calculations during a training exercise, she'd quietly offered suggestions based on her extensive experience with extreme distance shooting. The response had been immediate and humiliating. "I think we can handle military operations without input from the supply department," Reynolds had said, his tone suggesting she'd committed some breach of protocol by speaking at all. "Maybe stick to what you know: inventory, management, and equipment maintenance." The message was clear. She existed to serve, not to contribute. Her opinions weren't welcome, her expertise wasn't recognized, and her presence was barely tolerated. She was invisible in the way that support staff always were invisible to people who considered themselves operators, useful for maintaining their equipment but irrelevant to their actual mission. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, the Armory's senior enlisted supervisor, had provided the only glimpse of understanding during those early weeks. Walsh was a 20-year veteran who'd seen enough personnel transfers to recognize when someone's official story didn't match their actual capabilities. "You move like someone who's been in the field," Walsh had observed during one of their late-night equipment maintenance sessions. "The way you handle weapons, the way you check corners when you enter a room, that's not administrative training. That's muscle memory from people who've been shot at." Alexis had appreciated Walsh's discretion, but couldn't risk confirming her suspicions. The cover story that had accompanied her transfer was too important to compromise, even for someone who might understand. According to her official records, Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thorne was a logistics specialist whose career had peaked at managing supply chains for rear echelon units. Her combat experience consisted of a few routine deployments to secure bases where the greatest danger had been paperwork deadlines. The reality was that she'd spent 8 years as Delta Force's most effective sniper, operating under cover identities that were so deep even her Pentagon handlers sometimes forgot her real name. She'd eliminated high-value targets in environments where conventional forces couldn't operate, conducted reconnaissance in hostile territory where discovery meant death, and completed missions that would never appear in any official military history. Her specialty had been what the classified world called impossible geometry, shots that required understanding physics, meteorology, and human psychology at levels that most snipers never approached. While other operators focused on equipment and technique, Alexis had developed an almost mystical ability to read environments and predict outcomes that seemed to defy conventional wisdom, but that expertise was precisely what had made her dangerous to people like Colonel Steele. Her success highlighted the limitations of traditional approaches and the narrow thinking that characterized military leadership. She didn't just outperform male operators. She did it using methods that contradicted everything they'd been taught about how special operations should work. The final blow to her cover had come during her 3rd month at Fort Kestrel, when a visiting Pentagon official had recognized her during a routine inspection tour. General Harrison Webb had commanded Special Operations Forces during some of Alexis's most classified missions, and his reaction to seeing her in an armory had been viscerally shocked. "Thorne? What the hell are you doing here?" Webb had blurted, before catching himself and remembering that her current assignment was supposed to be legitimate career development, not the administrative exile it actually represented. The moment had lasted only seconds, but it was enough to confirm Colonel Steele's suspicions that his new maintenance specialist had a history that didn't match her current role. Instead of investigating why such an obviously capable officer had been reassigned to support duties, Steele had doubled down on treating her as invisible, perhaps recognizing that acknowledging her capabilities would force him to confront uncomfortable questions about competence and fairness. From that point forward, Alexis had become truly invisible at Fort Kestrel, not just ignored, but actively excluded from anything resembling operational planning or tactical discussion. She cleaned weapons, organized ammunition, and maintained equipment while real decisions were made by people who'd never faced the kind of challenges she'd overcome dozens of times. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was maintaining the very weapons that would be ineffective in the hands of the operators who dismissed her expertise. She'd watched training exercises where Fort Kestrel's supposed elite units failed at tasks she could have completed blindfolded, using equipment she'd optimized but methods that ignored everything she'd learned about what actually worked in combat. Now, as crisis communications crackled through her concealed earpiece and Neptune team faced annihilation in Meridian City, Alexis realized that 18 months of invisibility were about to end. The same expertise that had made her too dangerous for Colonel Steele's comfortable assumptions was about to become the only thing standing between 12 elite warriors and certain death. The woman they'd relegated to cleaning weapons was about to remind everyone why Delta Force had once considered her irreplaceable, and why some truths were too important to remain hidden when lives hung in the balance. 18 months earlier, Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thorne had stepped off the military transport at Fort Kestrel with nothing but a sealed duffel bag and transfer orders that revealed nothing about why one of Delta Force's most decorated operators was being reassigned to what appeared to be a career dead end. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the base's perimeter, its harsh landscape offering no clues about the political machinations that had brought her to this remote outpost. Fort Kestrel was supposed to be an elite training facility, the kind of installation where the military's best and brightest honed their skills for the most challenging missions. The base's reputation was built on its advanced weapons systems, cutting-edge tactical training programs, and the caliber of personnel who were supposedly hand-picked for assignment there. As Alexis surveyed the sprawling complex of modern buildings and state-of-the-art training ranges carved into the desert landscape, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was wrong with this picture. The base buzzed with the kind of aggressive confidence that characterized military units. Convinced of their own superiority, officers moved through the corridors with the swagger of people who'd never been told they couldn't accomplish something. Their conversations, dominated by comparisons of deployment records and discussions of equipment specifications that bordered on the obsessive. Everything about Fort Kestrel seemed designed to project an image of elite competence and technological superiority. But Alexis noticed details that others missed. The way personnel avoided making eye contact with certain senior officers, the subtle tension that characterized interactions between different units, and most tellingly, the absence of the easy camaraderie that marked truly elite military organizations. This wasn't confidence born from shared hardship and mutual respect. It was the brittle arrogance of people who'd never been tested against anything more challenging than their own assumptions. Colonel Marcus Steele dominated Fort Kestrel's social hierarchy like a feudal lord ruling over his personal kingdom. At 45, he possessed the kind of imposing physical presence that made other officers instinctively defer to his opinions, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to having his judgments accepted without question. His office walls were decorated with commendations and photographs from deployments that had established his reputation as a rising star in the special operations community. What wasn't displayed were the mission reports that detailed his unit's marginal performance during those same deployments, operations that had succeeded despite his leadership rather than because of it. Steele had mastered the art of political maneuvering within military bureaucracy, ensuring that his failures were attributed to external factors while his successes were amplified through carefully cultivated relationships with Pentagon decision-makers. When Alexis reported to his office for her initial assignment briefing, Steele's assessment was immediate and dismissive. Her transfer paperwork indicated a logistics background that suggested administrative competence rather than operational capability, and her reserved demeanor confirmed his assumption that she represented another example of the military's misguided attempts to promote diversity over merit. "Thorne," he said without looking up from his computer screen, his tone suggesting she was interrupting more important work. "I see you're coming from some kind of supply chain management position. Hope you understand that Fort Kestrel operates at a different level than wherever you've been pushing paperwork." The calculated insult was designed to establish hierarchy immediately, but Alexis absorbed it with the same emotional neutrality she'd maintained during hostile interrogations in environments where showing weakness meant death. She'd learned long ago that responding to provocations only provided ammunition for people looking for reasons to dismiss her capabilities. "Yes, sir," she replied with crisp professionalism. "Requesting assignment to duties where I can best serve the unit's mission." Steele's laugh held no warmth as he finally looked up from his screen, taking in her worn dress uniform and the absence of the kind of flashy decorations that characterized officers who'd never operated under deep cover. Everything about her appearance suggested mediocrity and administrative background, exactly the impression her handlers had intended when they'd constructed her cover identity. "Right," he said, making a note in her file that would determine her fate at Fort Kestrel. "We'll start you in equipment maintenance and see how you handle basic responsibilities before considering anything more demanding." The assignment to the armory basement was presented as temporary orientation, but Alexis recognized it for what it actually was: exile disguised as career development. She would be maintaining the weapons and equipment used by people who would never acknowledge her expertise, cleaning rifles that would be ineffective in the hands of operators who dismissed her presence as irrelevant to their mission. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh greeted her arrival in the armory with the professional courtesy of someone who'd seen enough personnel transfers to reserve judgment until performance could be evaluated. The armory itself was a study in contrasts, walls lined with advanced weapon systems worth millions of dollars, maintained by support staff who were treated as invisible by the operators who depended on their expertise. "Welcome to the basement, ma'am," Walsh said as she began Alexis's orientation tour. "It's not glamorous work, but these weapons keep the base's units operational. Most of the officers think maintenance happens by magic, but you and I know better." Walsh's tour revealed the scope of Fort Kestrel's equipment inventory: sniper rifles capable of precision at extreme distances, assault weapons optimized for close-quarters combat, and specialized systems designed for missions that required capabilities most conventional forces never approached. Everything was meticulously maintained according to specifications that emphasized rapid deployment over long-term reliability. What Walsh didn't mention, and what Alexis immediately recognized, was that the maintenance protocols being followed were optimized for equipment demonstration rather than combat effectiveness. Weapons were being maintained to look impressive during inspections and perform adequately during standardized testing, but the subtle adjustments that made the difference between success and failure in actual combat situations were being ignored. Alexis spent her first week at Fort Kestrel learning the base's routines while carefully observing the culture that had developed around Colonel Steele's leadership. The morning briefings were dominated by discussions of equipment upgrades and training scores that emphasized measurable metrics over tactical effectiveness. Officers competed to demonstrate their familiarity with the latest technological innovations, while showing little interest in understanding the fundamental principles that made those innovations useful. The base's supposed elite units trained constantly, but their exercises were conducted under controlled conditions that eliminated the variables and uncertainty that characterized real combat operations. Marksmanship training emphasized rapid target engagement at predetermined distances using standardized ammunition against static targets that never required the kind of adaptive thinking that separated truly elite operators from competent technicians. Captain Derek Morrison commanded Fort Kestrel's premier sniper unit, Precision Team Alpha, with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered challenges that couldn't be solved through superior equipment and aggressive tactics. Morrison was everything the military seemed to value in a special operations leader: young, physically imposing, and utterly convinced that modern technology could overcome any tactical challenge. His team's training regimen reflected the base's overall philosophy: maximize firepower, minimize engagement time, and rely on technological superiority to achieve objectives that previous generations had accomplished through patience and fieldcraft. They practiced rapid target acquisition using electronic optics, calculated ballistics through computer programs, and measured success through engagement speed rather than first-shot accuracy. During her second week, Alexis witnessed one of precision Team Alpha's training exercises from the armory's observation window. Morrison's shooters engaged targets at ranges up to 800 meters with impressive speed and reasonable accuracy, their performance generating the kind of quantifiable results that looked excellent in training reports and evaluation summaries. Alexis noticed problems that no one else seemed to recognize. The team's shooting positions were optimized for equipment comfort rather than environmental adaptation. Their ballistics calculations relied on computerized solutions that couldn't account for variables that experienced shooters learned to read instinctively. Most critically, their entire approach emphasized aggressive engagement over patient observation, exactly the opposite mindset required for the kind of precision shooting that actually determined success or failure in special operations missions. Staff Sergeant Walsh confirmed what Alexis had observed during one of their evening equipment maintenance sessions. Morrison's team produces impressive statistics, she said while cleaning rifle components, that showed wear patterns consistent with rapid-fire training. But they've never been tested against anything more challenging than their own assumptions about what elite marksmanship looks like. The conversation revealed the deeper problem that characterized Fort Kestrel's entire approach to special operations training. The base had become an echo chamber where methods were validated through internal testing rather than real-world effectiveness, where success was measured against artificial standards rather than combat requirements, and where questioning established procedures was seen as evidence of insufficient commitment rather than professional competence. Alexis realized she was trapped in an environment where her actual expertise was not just unwelcome, but potentially dangerous to the carefully constructed illusions that sustained the base's reputation for excellence. The skills that had made her Delta Force's most effective operator were precisely the capabilities that would expose the fundamental flaws in everything Fort Kestrel represented. As she settled into the routine of maintaining weapons for operators who would never acknowledge her expertise, Alexis understood that her exile was about more than personal politics or career jealousy. She represented a threat to an entire institutional culture that had convinced itself that superior equipment and aggressive confidence could substitute for the patient competence and hard-won wisdom that actually determined success when lives hung in the balance. The fundamental divide between Fort Kestrel's training philosophy and everything Alexis had learned during her 8 years with Delta Force became crystal clear during her 3rd week at the base. Colonel Steele had implemented what he called the Rapid Dominance Protocol, a comprehensive approach to special operations that emphasized overwhelming firepower, technological superiority, and aggressive engagement as the keys to mission success. The protocol's core motto was painted in bold letters across the main training facility: strike fast, strike hard, victory through superior force. Every aspect of Fort Kestrel's operations reflected this philosophy. Training scenarios were designed to reward speed over accuracy, decisive action over careful observation, and technological solutions over environmental adaptation. Instructors spoke constantly about windows of opportunity that lasted only seconds, the need to own the battle space through immediate aggression, and the importance of maintaining operational tempo that kept enemies reactive rather than allowing them time to adapt. The Rapid Dominance Protocol had emerged from Colonel Steele's analysis of recent special operations failures, but his conclusions were exactly opposite to what Alexis's experience had taught her about what actually determined success or failure in the field. Where Steele saw the need for faster decision-making and more aggressive tactics, Alexis recognized the consequences of rushing critical judgments and failing to understand environmental factors that couldn't be overcome through superior equipment. During mandatory base briefings, Steele would present his philosophy with the conviction of someone who'd never questioned his fundamental assumptions about how military operations should be conducted. Modern warfare doesn't reward hesitation, he'd tell assembled personnel, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his theories accepted without debate. The enemy respects firepower and decisive action. Everything else is academic theory that gets people killed in the real world. The approach resonated with officers who'd built their careers on conventional military thinking, but it represented everything Alexis had learned to avoid during missions where patience and environmental awareness had meant the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Her mentor in Delta Force, Colonel Sarah Hendricks, had taught her that true professional competence came from understanding when not to engage, how to read situations that appeared straightforward but contained hidden complexities, and most importantly, how to wait for the perfect moment even when external pressure demanded immediate action. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast, Hendricks had repeated countless times during Alexis's early training. The most dangerous moment in any operation is when you think you understand everything and stop questioning your assumptions. Speed kills when it prevents you from seeing what's actually happening. That philosophy had guided Alexis through missions. In environments where conventional tactics would have resulted in mission failure and operator casualties, she'd learned to read wind patterns that changed direction every few minutes, to identify thermal layers that affected bullet trajectory in ways no computer could predict, and to recognize behavioral patterns in targets that revealed opportunities invisible to operators focused solely on rapid engagement. But at Fort Kestrel, that kind of methodical analysis was seen as evidence of indecision and lack of confidence. Captain Morrison's Precision Team, Alpha, exemplified the base's preferred approach. They trained constantly for scenarios that required split-second decisions and immediate engagement, measuring their effectiveness through metrics that emphasized response time over first-shot accuracy. During one of Morrison's training demonstrations, Alexis watched from the armory window as his team engaged multiple targets at various distances, using electronic optics and computerized ballistic solutions. The exercise was designed to simulate a hostage rescue scenario where every second of delay increased the risk of civilian casualties. and Morrison's shooters performed with the mechanical precision that characterized their training. Outstanding response times, Steele announced to the assembled observers, his satisfaction evident as he reviewed the electronic scoring system. Target engagement averaging 4.2 seconds from identification to impact. That's the kind of operational tempo that wins in the real world. But Alexis noticed details that the official scoring system couldn't measure. Morrison's shooters had relied entirely on their electronic equipment without demonstrating any understanding of how environmental conditions were affecting their shots. Their positions were optimized for equipment comfort rather than natural concealment. Most critically, they'd engaged targets in a predetermined sequence rather than analyzing the tactical situation to determine which threats actually required immediate neutralization. The gaps in their training became apparent when Staff Sergeant Walsh mentioned equipment problems that had been developing over recent months. Morrison's team is burning through rifle barrels faster than any unit I've ever maintained, she told Alexis during one of their evening work sessions. They're firing so many rounds during training that their weapons are losing accuracy, but they keep requesting more ammunition rather than addressing the fundamental problem. Walsh pulled up maintenance records that revealed a troubling pattern of equipment abuse disguised as intensive training. Precision Team Alpha was conducting rapid-fire exercises that stressed their weapons beyond design specifications, creating accuracy problems that they compensated for by replacing equipment rather than modifying their techniques. The protocols they're following would work fine for conventional infantry, Walsh continued. But precision shooting requires understanding your equipment at a level that these rapid engagement methods don't develop. They're treating sniper rifles like assault weapons and wondering why their accuracy degrades over time. The conversation revealed the deeper philosophical problem that characterized Fort Kestrel's entire approach to special operations training. The base had embraced technological solutions and aggressive tactics as substitutes for the patient competence and environmental awareness that actually determine success in complex operational environments. Alexis's own background offered a stark contrast to everything Fort Kestrel represented. Her training with Delta Force had emphasized understanding natural systems, reading environmental conditions that affected weapon performance, and developing the psychological discipline to wait for perfect shots rather than taking acceptable ones. She'd learned to make ballistics calculations that accounted for variables no computer program could predict, to identify shooting positions that remained concealed for hours rather than minutes, and to recognize opportunities that emerged only after extended observation. During her 4th week at the base, Alexis witnessed the consequences of Fort Kestrel's philosophy during a joint training exercise with a visiting Marine reconnaissance unit. The Marines had requested assistance with long-range precision shooting, and Morrison's team had been assigned to provide instruction and technical support. The exercise involved engaging targets at distances up to 1,200 meters, under field conditions. That included variable wind patterns and thermal effects from the desert environment. Morrison's shooters approached the challenge with their standard rapid engagement methodology, using electronic systems to calculate ballistics and attempting to overwhelm environmental variables through volume of fire. The results were predictably disappointing. Despite superior equipment and extensive training, Precision Team Alpha struggled to achieve consistent accuracy at extended ranges when environmental conditions couldn't be controlled through technological solutions. Their electronic systems provided ballistics data, but they lacked the experiential knowledge necessary to interpret that data in context of conditions their equipment couldn't measure. The visiting Marines who'd been trained using older methodologies that emphasized environmental awareness and patient observation consistently outperformed Fort Kestrel's supposed elite unit despite having inferior equipment and less advanced training facilities. Their success highlighted the fundamental flaw in the rapid dominance protocol. It optimized for controlled conditions rather than the variable environments where Special operations actually occurred. Colonel Steele's response to the exercise. Results revealed the institutional blindness that characterized his leadership approach. Rather than questioning whether his training philosophy might be flawed, he blamed equipment problems and demanded upgrades to electronic systems that would provide more detailed environmental data. We need sensors that can measure wind conditions. At multiple points along the bullet's flight path, he told the assembled staff during the post-exercise briefing. Technology exists to eliminate these variables. We just need to implement it properly. The solution represented everything. That was wrong with Fort Kestrel's approach to professional competence. Instead of developing operators who could read environmental conditions through direct observation and experience, Steele wanted to create dependence on technological systems that would fail when missions took place in environments where electronic solutions weren't available. Alexis realized she was witnessing the institutionalization of incompetence, disguised as innovation. Fort Kestrel was producing operators who could function effectively only under controlled conditions with superior equipment, but who lacked the fundamental skills necessary to adapt when circumstances required patience, environmental awareness, and the kind of methodical competence that couldn't be programmed into electronic systems. The philosophy clash wasn't just about different approaches to marksmanship training. It represented competing visions of what professional military competence actually looked like and how effective operators should be developed. Fort Kestrel's approach created impressive statistics and demonstration scores, but it failed to develop the adaptive thinking and environmental awareness that determined success when technological solutions weren't sufficient and rapid engagement wasn't the appropriate tactical response. As Alexis continued maintaining weapons that would be ineffective in the hands of operators who'd never learned to use them properly, she understood that her exile represented more than personal politics. She was trapped in an institution that had convinced itself that superior equipment and aggressive confidence could substitute for the patient wisdom and hard-won competence that actually kept people alive, when everything depended on making the perfect decision at the perfect moment. The moment that would define Alexis's standing at Fort Kestrel came during the 6th week of her assignment, when Colonel Steele announced a comprehensive evaluation exercise designed to showcase the base's capabilities to visiting Pentagon officials. The Desert Storm Challenge would test every aspect of Fort Kestrel's training programs, with special emphasis on precision shooting under combat conditions that would demonstrate the effectiveness of the Rapid Dominance Protocol. The exercise scenario was ambitious in scope, a simulated terrorist compound situated in the Nevada desert's most challenging terrain, complete with hostage situations, multiple target arrays, and environmental conditions designed to test every aspect of operator capability. Teams from across the base would compete in a series of challenges that measured everything from rapid target engagement to tactical movement under fire. For Captain Morrison's Precision Team Alpha, the exercise represented an opportunity to validate months of intensive training and demonstrate their superiority over conventional units. The precision shooting component would be the most demanding test any of them had faced, engaging targets at distances up to 1,500 meters, under field conditions that included variable wind patterns, thermal mirage effects, and time pressures that simulated actual combat scenarios. Morrison approached the challenge with the confidence that had characterized his entire tenure at Fort Kestrel. His team had consistently dominated base training exercises, their equipment was state-of-the-art, and their rapid engagement techniques had produced impressive statistics that validated Colonel Steele's training philosophy. There was no reason to expect anything other than decisive victory that would cement their reputation as the base's premier unit. The night before the exercise, Alexis worked late in the armory, ensuring that all weapons were optimized for the challenging conditions the teams would face. She'd maintained Morrison's custom rifles for months, watching their accuracy degrade as rapid-fire training stressed the barrels beyond their design specifications. The electronic optics were perfectly calibrated. The computerized ballistic systems contained the latest environmental data, and every component met the technical specifications that define precision shooting equipment. But Alexis knew that equipment perfection couldn't compensate for the fundamental training deficiencies she'd observed in Morrison's team. Their reliance on electronic systems had prevented them from developing the intuitive understanding of environmental conditions that extreme-range shooting required. Their emphasis on rapid engagement had created muscle memory that prioritized speed over the patient observation necessary for first-shot accuracy. Most critically, they'd never learned to adapt their techniques when technological solutions weren't sufficient for the challenges they faced. Staff Sergeant Walsh joined her in the armory as she completed the final equipment checks, both women. Understanding that tomorrow's exercise would reveal truths about Fort Kestrel's training effectiveness that Colonel Steele wasn't prepared to acknowledge. Morrison's rifles are in perfect mechanical condition, Walsh observed while reviewing the maintenance logs. But perfect equipment doesn't fix fundamental training problems. These guys are about to face environmental conditions that their rapid-fire methodology can't handle. The exercise began at dawn with Morrison's team establishing their primary shooting position on a ridge overlooking the simulated terrorist compound. The Pentagon observers, including General Patricia Hawthorne and several other senior officials, monitored the exercise through secure communications and real-time video feeds that would capture every aspect of the team's performance. The first phase required engaging static targets at known distances under controlled conditions, exactly the kind of scenario where Morrison's team excelled. Their electronic systems quickly calculated ballistic solutions, and their rapid engagement training produced the kind of impressive response times that characterized all their previous performances. The targets fell in sequence, and Morrison's confidence was evident in his radio communications with exercise control. "Alpha Team, all targets neutralized," he reported with satisfaction. "Moving to Phase 2 engagement areas." But Phase 2 introduced the variables that would expose the limitations of Fort Kestrel's training philosophy. The targets were now positioned at unknown distances, requiring range estimation under field conditions where electronic systems provided incomplete information. Wind patterns were shifting unpredictably as thermal effects from the desert floor created atmospheric disturbances that changed direction every few minutes. Morrison's team approached these challenges using the same rapid engagement methodology that had served them in controlled training environments. They relied on their electronic rangefinders and computerized ballistic systems, attempting to overcome environmental variables through technological solutions that couldn't account for conditions their sensors couldn't measure. The results were immediately apparent to anyone with experience in precision shooting under field conditions. Morrison's first shot missed by 18 inches at 800 meters, an error that would have been fatal in an actual hostage situation. His second shooter's attempt at a 1,000-meter target sailed wide by nearly 2 feet as shifting wind conditions rendered his electronic calculations useless. Through her concealed radio earpiece, Alexis monitored the exercise communications as Morrison's confidence began to crack under the pressure of repeated misses. His team was encountering the fundamental reality that precision shooting under variable conditions required skills their training had never developed. The ability to read environmental cues that no electronic system could measure, patience to wait for optimal conditions rather than forcing shots when circumstances weren't perfect, and most importantly, the humility to acknowledge when technological solutions weren't sufficient for the challenges they faced. "Control, Alpha Team requesting updated environmental data," Morrison transmitted, his voice carrying the first hints of desperation as his electronic systems failed to provide solutions for conditions they hadn't been programmed to handle. "Wind readings are inconsistent with our ballistics calculations." But the exercise was designed to simulate real-world conditions where Operators couldn't rely on perfect environmental data or technological support. Morrison's team was being forced to demonstrate the kind of adaptive capability that separated truly elite operators from technicians who could function effectively only under controlled conditions. By the exercise's midpoint, Morrison's team had failed to engage successfully at any target beyond 600 meters. Their electronic systems provided ballistics data, but they lacked the experiential knowledge necessary to interpret that information in context of environmental conditions that changed faster than their computers could calculate. Their rapid engagement training had created muscle memory that worked against the patient observation required for extreme range accuracy. The watching Pentagon officials were witnessing a comprehensive failure of everything Fort Kestrel claimed to represent. The base's supposed elite unit, equipped with the most advanced weapons and training facilities available, was being defeated by environmental conditions that experienced snipers learned to read through patient observation and hard-won fieldcraft. Colonel Steele's response to the developing disaster revealed the institutional blindness that had created the problems his team was experiencing. Rather than recognizing that his training philosophy might be flawed, he blamed equipment malfunctions and demanded technical solutions for what were fundamentally human performance problems. Exercise control, Alpha Team is experiencing equipment difficulties, he radioed to the observation post, requesting technical support to resolve ballistics computer errors. But there were no equipment difficulties. Morrison's team was simply encountering conditions that their training had never prepared them to handle. The electronic systems were functioning perfectly, providing accurate data that the operators didn't know how to interpret. The rifles were mechanically sound, capable of precision that their users couldn't achieve. The failure was human, institutional, and complete. General Hawthorne's voice cut through the exercise communications with the authority of someone who'd seen enough military failures to recognize institutional problems when they emerged. Exercise terminated, she announced. All units returned to base for immediate debriefing. The ride back to Fort Kestrel was conducted in silence that spoke louder than any criticism could have expressed. Morrison's team had suffered a public failure that exposed the fundamental inadequacy of everything they'd been taught about precision shooting and tactical competence. Their technological superiority and aggressive training had proven worthless when confronted with environmental variables that required patient adaptation rather than rapid response. In the armory that evening, Alexis continued her equipment maintenance duties while listening to the heated discussions taking place throughout the base. Morrison's failure had shaken Fort Kestrel's confidence in ways that months of successful training exercises hadn't prepared anyone to handle. The questions being asked weren't just about equipment or training techniques. They were about whether the base's entire approach to developing special operations capability was fundamentally misguided. Staff Sergeant Walsh joined her in the equipment bay, both women understanding that they'd witnessed something that would have consequences far beyond a single failed exercise. 18 months I've been maintaining weapons for these guys, Walsh said quietly. Tonight's the first time I've seen anyone question whether perfect equipment can fix imperfect training. Alexis nodded, recognizing that Morrison's public failure represented an opportunity that might never come again. The institutional arrogance that had protected Fort Kestrel's flawed training philosophy had been shattered by undeniable evidence that technological superiority and aggressive tactics couldn't substitute for the patient competence that actually determined success when conditions weren't perfect. The woman they'd relegated to cleaning weapons understood that Fort Kestrel's moment of institutional crisis might finally provide the opening. She needed to demonstrate that there were better approaches to developing truly elite capability, approaches that emphasized environmental awareness over electronic systems, patient competence over rapid response, and adaptive thinking over technological dependence. The aftermath of Morrison's public failure created an opportunity that Alexis had been waiting 18 months to exploit. General Hawthorne's immediate response to the Desert Storm Challenge disaster was to order a comprehensive review of Fort Kestrel's training effectiveness, starting with unrestricted access to all performance data, equipment records, and personnel. Files that might explain how the base's premier unit had failed so catastrophically under conditions that any competent sniper should have been able to handle. Staff Sergeant Walsh received orders to provide complete transparency regarding weapons, maintenance, equipment performance, and any technical issues that might have contributed to Precision Team Alpha's failure. For the first time since arriving at Fort Kestrel, Alexis found herself with legitimate access to classified databases that revealed the true scope of problems that had been developing beneath the base's facade of elite competence. The initial data review confirmed what Alexis had suspected from months of maintaining weapons that showed accelerated wear patterns, inconsistent with precision shooting protocols. Morrison's team wasn't just failing under field conditions. They'd been gradually losing accuracy for months, as their rapid-fire training methods degraded equipment that had been designed for careful, methodical use. "Look at these barrel inspection reports," Walsh said as they accessed maintenance records that painted a troubling picture of systematic equipment abuse. "Morrison's rifles have been losing accuracy at a rate of approximately 2 minutes of angle per month. That's catastrophic. Degradation disguised as normal wear and tear." The electronic logs revealed that Precision Team Alpha had been firing an average of 2,400 rounds per week during training exercises, nearly 4 times the recommended volume for maintaining precision accuracy. Their rapid engagement protocols were literally burning out rifle barrels while creating muscle memory that prioritized speed over the careful trigger control necessary for extreme range shooting. But equipment problems were only the beginning of what the unrestricted database access revealed. General Hawthorne's investigation had unlocked personnel records that showed disturbing patterns in how Fort Kestrel selected and promoted its supposedly elite operators. Morrison's team hadn't been chosen based on demonstrated marksmanship ability or field experience. They'd been selected because their backgrounds and training philosophy aligned with Colonel Steele's institutional preferences. Morrison never completed advanced sniper training, Alexis discovered while reviewing qualification records that had been classified as personnel sensitive. His longest confirmed shot in actual combat was 400 meters, but he's been training others for engagements at distances he's never attempted himself. The revelation explained much about Precision Team Alpha's fundamental incompetence. Morrison had been promoted based on his enthusiasm for technological solutions and aggressive tactics rather than demonstrated expertise in precision shooting. His team members had been chosen using similar criteria. They represented Colonel Steele's vision of what elite operators should look like rather than individuals who possessed the skills necessary for extreme range marksmanship. Walsh's access to communication logs revealed even more disturbing information about how Fort Kestrel had maintained its reputation despite consistent performance problems. Mission reports from units that had deployed with Fort Kestrel training showed a pattern of failures that had been systematically concealed through creative interpretation of operational outcomes and blame shifting that attributed problems to intelligence failures or equipment malfunctions. 6 different deployments over the past 2 years, Walsh said while scrolling through after-action reports that painted a consistent picture of inadequate performance. Each one shows the same pattern: missed shots at critical moments, inability to adapt to environmental conditions, and over-reliance on technological solutions that weren't available in field environments. The most damaging evidence came from classified communications between Fort Kestrel and Pentagon oversight offices. Colonel Steele had been reporting training statistics and equipment performance data that presented a completely false picture of his unit's actual capabilities. Exercise scores had been manipulated to emphasize rapid engagement times while downplaying accuracy problems. Equipment failures had been attributed to manufacturing defects rather than training-induced damage. Most significantly, real-world performance problems had been explained as the result of inadequate intelligence or equipment rather than training deficiencies. Alexis realized she was documenting not just individual incompetence, but systematic fraud that had been perpetrated against military leadership who depended on accurate assessments of unit capability for critical operational planning. Fort Kestrel wasn't just failing to develop effective operators, it was actively deceiving Pentagon decision-makers about the readiness and capability of units that might be deployed in situations where lives depended on precision shooting. Database access also revealed historical performance data from previous base commanders that provided context for understanding how institutional problems had developed over time. Under Colonel Steele's predecessor, Fort Kestrel had maintained training standards that emphasized environmental awareness and methodical shooting, techniques similar to what Alexis had learned during her Delta Force service. Performance records from 3 years ago show completely different patterns, Walsh observed while comparing historical data with current statistics. Training ammunition consumption was 60% lower, equipment lasted twice as long, and deployment performance. Reports showed significantly better accuracy rates under field conditions. The historical comparison revealed that Fort Kestrel's problems weren't inherent to the facility or its mission. They were the direct result of Colonel Steele's decision to abandon proven training methods in favor of technological solutions and aggressive tactics that produced impressive demonstration scores, while failing to develop actual operational capability. But the most significant discovery came when Alexis accessed ballistics databases that contained detailed environmental data from the Desert Storm Challenge exercise. The conditions that had defeated Morrison's team weren't unusually challenging. They represented normal variations in wind speed, thermal effects, and atmospheric pressure that any competent precision shooter should have been able to adapt to through direct observation and experience. Wind conditions never exceeded 12 miles per hour with gusts to 18. Alexis noted while analyzing meteorological data that revealed the exercise's environmental challenges. Thermal mirage effects were moderate, and visibility remained excellent throughout the engagement period. These weren't extreme conditions. They were typical field environment variables. The data confirmed that Morrison's failure hadn't resulted from unusually difficult conditions or equipment problems. His team had been defeated by normal environmental factors that experienced snipers learned to read and adapt to through patient observation and fieldcraft that Fort Kestrel's training programs had never developed. Walsh's investigation into communication protocols revealed another layer of institutional problems that explained how Fort Kestrel had maintained its reputation despite consistent performance deficiencies. The base had been selectively reporting training results to Pentagon oversight offices, emphasizing rapid engagement statistics while omitting accuracy data that revealed fundamental problems with operator capability. Monthly reports to Special Operations Command show average target engagement times, but no data about first shot hit percentages beyond 600 meters. Walsh discovered while reviewing official communications that painted a misleading picture of unit effectiveness. They're reporting metrics that make rapid-fire training look successful, while concealing the accuracy problems that make it useless for actual precision shooting. The pattern of selective reporting extended to equipment maintenance data, where normal wear and tear was being attributed to intensive training rather than inappropriate use that degraded weapons through methods inconsistent with precision shooting requirements. Barrel replacements were being justified as evidence of rigorous training standards rather than indications that training methods were damaging equipment designed for careful, methodical use. As General Hawthorne's investigation continued, Alexis found herself with access to classified assessments of Fort Kestrel's training effectiveness that had been prepared by external evaluation teams. The reports contained recommendations for fundamental changes to training, philosophy, and personnel selection criteria that had been ignored or suppressed by Colonel Steele's administration. Pentagon consultants identified these exact problems. 18 months ago, Alexis discovered while reviewing evaluation reports that had predicted the kind of failure Morrison's team had just experienced. Every recommendation about emphasizing environmental awareness and reducing dependence on electronic systems was rejected as incompatible with modern operational requirements. The external evaluations revealed that knowledgeable observers had recognized Fort Kestrel's institutional problems long before they became public failures. Colonel Steele had successfully suppressed criticism and maintained his training philosophy despite expert warnings that predicted exactly the kind of catastrophic performance breakdown that had just occurred during the Desert Storm Challenge. Staff: Sergeant Walsh's position as senior armory supervisor provided access to one final piece of evidence that completed the picture of institutional dysfunction that characterized Fort Kestrel's approach to developing precision shooting capability. Weapons requisition records showed that the base had been ordering replacement equipment at rates that were completely inconsistent with normal military usage patterns. "We've replaced more rifle barrels in the past 18 months than most units replace in 5 years, Walsh noted while reviewing procurement data that revealed the hidden costs of Fort Kestrel's training methods. The Pentagon has been funding equipment replacement that's actually covering up training-induced damage that shouldn't be occurring if weapons were being used properly. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Fort Kestrel's reputation for excellence had been built on systematic deception, selective reporting, and training methods that produced impressive statistics while failing to develop the environmental awareness and patient competence that actually determined success in precision shooting under field conditions. Morrison's public failure had simply exposed problems that had been developing for years. Beneath a facade of technological sophistication and aggressive confidence, the comprehensive evidence that Alexis had gathered through her unprecedented access to Fort Kestrel's classified databases painted a picture of institutional dysfunction so complete that she understood her documentation could potentially reshape how the entire military approached precision marksmanship training. But transforming evidence into action required more than just compiling data. It demanded a systematic analysis that connected individual failures to broader patterns of institutional neglect and deliberate deception. Working late into the Nevada desert nights, Alexis began constructing what amounted to a comprehensive indictment of everything Fort Kestrel represented. Her analysis went far beyond Morrison's public failure during the Desert Storm, challenged to examine how Colonel Steele's training philosophy had created systemic problems that affected not just precision shooting capability, but the fundamental competence of operators who might be deployed in situations where lives depended on skills they'd never actually developed. The first section of her analysis documented the correlation between Fort Kestrel's training methods and equipment degradation, patterns that revealed the hidden costs of prioritizing rapid engagement over precision marksmanship. Using maintenance records that Staff Sergeant Walsh had helped her access, Alexis demonstrated that weapons subjected to Fort Kestrel's training protocols lost accuracy at rates that were not just unsustainable, but actively dangerous for operators who might depend on precision shooting under combat conditions. Barrel life analysis shows systematic degradation consistent with training methods that stress weapons beyond their design specifications. She wrote in her technical assessment, "Current protocols reduce effective accuracy lifespan by approximately 70%. Creating equipment that appears functional during demonstrations but fails to meet precision requirements under field conditions." But equipment problems were symptoms of deeper institutional issues that Alexis traced through personnel records, training documentation, and performance evaluations that revealed how Fort Kestrel selected and developed its supposedly elite operators. Morrison's team hadn't failed because they lacked natural ability. They'd failed because they'd been chosen and trained using criteria that had no relationship to the skills actually required for precision shooting under variable conditions. Her analysis of personnel selection revealed that Fort Kestrel prioritized candidates who demonstrated enthusiasm for technological solutions and aggressive tactics over individuals with demonstrated marksmanship ability or environmental awareness. The base had created a culture where asking questions about training methods was seen as evidence of insufficient commitment, where patience was interpreted as indecision, and where reliance on electronic systems was valued more highly than the fieldcraft skills that separated competent shooters from equipment operators. Selection criteria emphasize rapid decision-making and technological proficiency while failing to assess environmental awareness, patient observation skills, or demonstrated accuracy under variable conditions, Alexis documented. This approach produces operators who function effectively only under controlled circumstances that rarely exist in actual combat environments. The most damaging section of her analysis examined deployment records that Colonel Steele had systematically misrepresented to Pentagon oversight offices, using communication logs and after-action reports that revealed the true scope of Fort Kestrel's performance problems. Alexis documented a pattern of mission failures that had been concealed through selective reporting and blame shifting that protected the base's reputation while endangering future operations. 6 separate deployments over the past 2 years showed consistent patterns of missed shots at critical moments, inability to adapt to environmental conditions that experienced snipers handled routinely, and over-reliance on technological solutions that weren't available in field environments. In each case, Fort Kestrel trained operators had failed to perform effectively beyond 600 meters, forcing mission commanders to modify tactical plans around limitations that should never have existed in precision-trained units. Deployment analysis reveals systematic underperformance in precision shooting scenarios requiring environmental adaptation. Alexis wrote, "Units trained at Fort Kestrel show 73% mission modification rates for engagements beyond 800 meters, compared to 12% for units trained using traditional methodologies." The statistical comparison was devastating because it used Fort Kestrel's own performance data to demonstrate that Colonel Steele's training philosophy produced operators who were less capable than those developed through methods his protocols had replaced. The rapid engagement techniques and technological dependence that characterized the base's approach weren't just ineffective, they were actively counterproductive for developing the skills that precision shooting actually required. Walsh's assistance proved invaluable as Alexis expanded her investigation to include comparative analysis of training methodologies used by other military precision shooting programs. Access to inter-service training databases revealed that Fort Kestrel was an outlier in its emphasis on rapid engagement and electronic systems, with most successful programs maintaining traditional approaches that emphasized environmental awareness and patient observation. Comparative effectiveness data shows inverse correlation between rapid engagement training intensity and field performance accuracy. Alexis documented programs emphasizing environmental awareness and methodical shooting techniques consistently produce operators with superior precision capability under variable conditions. The comparison revealed that Fort Kestrel's problems weren't unique or inevitable. They were the direct result of training decisions that contradicted established best practices for developing precision marksmanship capability. Other military programs achieved superior results using approaches that emphasized exactly the skills Fort Kestrel's protocols had abandoned in favor of technological solutions and aggressive tactics. But documenting problems was only part of what Alexis's analysis needed to accomplish. General Hawthorne's investigation required actionable recommendations that could guide institutional reforms. And Alexis used her Delta Force experience to propose alternative training methods that could restore Fort Kestrel's effectiveness while avoiding the technological dependence that had created current problems. Her recommendation section outlined a comprehensive approach to precision marksmanship training that integrated environmental awareness, patient observation skills, and methodical shooting techniques that had proven effective during her 8 years with special operations. The proposed methods emphasized understanding natural systems over relying on electronic solutions, developing intuitive environmental reading over depending on computerized calculations, and building confidence through competence rather than equipment superiority. Recommended training protocols emphasize environmental integration, patient observation, and methodical accuracy development, she wrote. These approaches produce operators capable of adapting to variable conditions without technological dependence, while maintaining precision effectiveness under stress conditions that defeat rapid engagement methodologies. The scope of institutional change her recommendations required was substantial, but Alexis understood that partial reforms would fail. To address the cultural problems that had enabled Fort Kestrel's performance deficiencies to develop and persist. Colonel Steele's training philosophy wasn't just technically flawed. It reflected fundamental misunderstandings about what professional military competence actually looked like, and how effective operators should be developed. As her analysis neared completion, Alexis faced the critical decision of how to present findings that would inevitably challenge careers built on promoting the methods she was documenting as systematically ineffective. Her evidence was comprehensive and undeniable, but changing institutional culture required more than just presenting data. It demanded courage to confront established authority and risk the consequences of challenging assumptions that powerful people had invested their reputations in defending. Staff Sergeant Walsh provided perspective that helped Alexis understand the broader implications of what she was preparing to reveal. 20 years in this business, and I've never seen documentation this complete, Walsh said while reviewing the final sections of Alexis's analysis. You're not just challenging training methods, you're proving that institutional leadership has been systematically deceiving Pentagon oversight while endangering operators through inadequate preparation. The weight of that responsibility was enormous. Alexis's analysis would either initiate reforms that could save lives and restore military effectiveness, or it would be suppressed by institutional forces that preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. Her career and reputation would be collateral damage either way, but the consequences of remaining silent were measured in mission failures and operator casualties that could be prevented through better training. The final decision came when Alexis accessed the most recent deployment reports showing that Fort Kestrel trained units were scheduled for missions requiring exactly the kind of precision shooting capability that Colonel Steele's training had failed to develop. Operators who couldn't adapt to environmental variables beyond 600 meters were being assigned to tasks that might require shots at distances where technological solutions wouldn't compensate for inadequate training. Her documentation was complete. Her analysis was comprehensive, and her recommendations provided actionable alternatives to the failed methods that had created Fort Kestrel's problems. The evidence spoke for itself, but presenting it would require crossing lines that could end her military career while potentially saving lives she would never know about in situations she would never see. The moment had come to discover whether institutional courage was more important than personal security, when everything depended on someone having the strength to tell the truth. The decision to bypass Fort Kestrel's chain of command and deliver her analysis directly to General Hawthorne required Alexis to cross institutional lines that could destroy her military career, even if her evidence proved everything she claimed about Colonel Steele's systematic deception. Staff Sergeant Walsh provided the crucial connection when she revealed that her brother-in-law, Master Sergeant Kevin Torres, served on General Hawthorne's personal staff and had been expressing private concerns about discrepancies in Fort Kestrel's Reported capabilities versus observed performance. Torres has been asking questions about Fort Kestrel for months, Walsh explained during one of their evening sessions in the armory. The general's been getting reports that don't match what Pentagon intelligence assessments suggest about operator capability, and she's been looking for someone with inside knowledge who could explain the disconnect. The conversation revealed that Alexis wasn't the only person who'd recognized Fort Kestrel's institutional problems. General Hawthorne had been conducting her own investigation into special operations training effectiveness, and the Desert Storm Challenge failure had provided exactly the kind of public evidence she needed to justify more aggressive inquiry into programs that had been protected by institutional politics and selective reporting. Torres arranged a secure communication channel that would allow Alexis to transmit her complete analysis directly to General Hawthorne's staff without alerting Fort Kestrel's command. Structure. The process required using classified communication protocols that would leave electronic traces, making it impossible for Alexis to deny her involvement if Colonel Steele discovered what she'd done. Once you send this, there's no going back, Walsh warned as they prepared the transmission using Torres's authentication codes. Steele will know someone inside the base provided classified information to Pentagon oversight, and he'll tear the place apart trying to find who did it. But Alexis understood that the upcoming deployments she'd discovered made delay impossible. Fort Kestrel-trained operators were scheduled for missions requiring precision shooting capability that their training had never developed, creating situations where mission failure could result in operator casualties and civilian deaths that could be prevented through immediate intervention. The secure transmission to General Hawthorne included not just Alexis's comprehensive analysis, but supporting documentation that proved every claim through official records that Colonel Steele couldn't dispute or explain away. Equipment maintenance logs, deployment performance reports, personnel selection criteria, and communication records combined to create an evidentiary foundation that was both overwhelming and undeniable. General Hawthorne's response came within 6 hours, requesting an immediate face-to-face briefing that would require Alexis to present her findings to Pentagon officials who would determine whether Fort Kestrel's problems justified the kind of institutional intervention that could reshape special operations training throughout the military. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning at Nellis Air Force Base, requiring Alexis to travel off Fort Kestrel without alerting Colonel Steele to her absence. Walsh provided cover by arranging what appeared to be routine equipment transport to Nellis, creating a legitimate reason for Alexis to leave the base while carrying materials that would support her presentation to General Hawthorne's investigation team. The deception was necessary because requesting official permission to brief Pentagon officials would have alerted Colonel Steele to what was happening, giving him time to prepare defensive responses and potentially suppress evidence before it could be properly evaluated. The briefing took place in a secure conference room where General Hawthorne had assembled a team that included representatives from Special Operations Command, Pentagon Training Oversight, and independent analysts who specialized in evaluating military training effectiveness. Alexis found herself facing the kind of high-level scrutiny that could either validate her entire analysis or expose her as someone whose personal grievances had motivated unfounded accusations against legitimate military authority. Specialist Thorne, General Hawthorne began, using Alexis's cover identity while clearly understanding that her background was more complex than her current assignment suggested. Your analysis makes serious allegations about systematic performance problems and institutional deception. I need you to walk us through your findings and be prepared to defend every conclusion you've reached. The presentation required Alexis to explain technical concepts and institutional dynamics to officials who understood military operations, but might not appreciate the subtle distinctions between different approaches to precision marksmanship. Training. She began with equipment analysis that demonstrated how Fort Kestrel's training methods created measurable degradation in weapon accuracy, using maintenance records that showed patterns inconsistent with proper precision shooting protocols. Barrel life analysis reveals systematic stress patterns that reduce effective accuracy by 70%, compared to weapons maintained under traditional protocols. Alexis explained while displaying technical documentation that proved her claims. This degradation occurs because rapid-fire training methods stress rifle components beyond their design specifications, while creating habits that work against precision shooting requirements. The Pentagon representatives followed her technical explanation with the attention of people who understood that equipment problems often revealed deeper training deficiencies. But the real impact came when Alexis presented deployment performance data that showed how Fort Kestrel's training failures translated to mission modifications and operator limitations that could affect operational success. 6 recent deployments show consistent patterns where Fort Kestrel-trained units required tactical plan modifications for engagements beyond 600 meters. She continued, presenting statistical analysis that revealed the scope of capability limitations that Colonel Steele had concealed through selective reporting. Mission commanders were forced to adapt their operations around operator limitations that shouldn't exist in precision-trained units. The deployment analysis generated immediate concern among officials who realized they'd been making strategic decisions based on capability assessments that didn't reflect actual operator performance. If Fort Kestrel was systematically producing inadequate precision shooters while reporting successful training outcomes, then Pentagon planning for special operations missions might be based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about available capabilities. General Hawthorne's questions revealed that she'd been conducting parallel investigations into other aspects of Fort Kestrel's operations that supported Alexis's analysis. Your equipment degradation findings correlate with procurement anomalies we've been tracking, she said while reviewing requisition data that showed unusual patterns in replacement equipment requests. Fort Kestrel has been ordering rifle components at rates that suggest either exceptional training intensity or systematic equipment abuse. The conversation revealed that Alexis's analysis provided missing pieces for understanding institutional problems that had been developing across multiple areas of Fort Kestrel's operations. Her technical expertise and access to classified maintenance records had enabled her to document patterns that external investigators had suspected but couldn't prove without inside knowledge of how equipment was actually being used and maintained. But the most challenging part of the briefing came when officials questioned her credibility and motivation for challenging Colonel Steele's authority. Her current assignment as equipment maintenance personnel didn't obviously qualify her to evaluate precision marksmanship training effectiveness, and her allegations against established military leadership required justification that went beyond technical analysis. Specialist Thorne asked Colonel James Richardson from Special Operations Command, "Your analysis demonstrates sophisticated understanding of precision shooting principles and training methodology. What's your background in these areas, and why should we consider your assessment more reliable than evaluations conducted by Fort Kestrel's leadership?" The question forced Alexis to confront the fundamental deception that had protected her true identity throughout her 18 months at Fort Kestrel. Establishing her credibility required revealing aspects of her background that were classified at levels that most of the assembled officials weren't cleared to access, creating a situation where proving her expertise meant exposing secrets that could compromise ongoing operations. General Hawthorne intervened with information that suggested she'd already investigated Alexis's actual background and understood why someone with her capabilities had been assigned to equipment maintenance duties. Specialist Thorne's qualifications for conducting this analysis will be addressed through separate channels, she said in a tone that ended further questioning about Alexis's credentials. What matters for this briefing is whether her findings are accurate and actionable. The exchange revealed that General Hawthorne possessed information about Alexis's true identity that other officials lacked, suggesting that the investigation into Fort Kestrel was part of a broader inquiry into special operations training effectiveness that involved classified aspects of military personnel management. Alexis's analysis wasn't just challenging Colonel Steele's training methods. It was providing evidence for institutional reforms that could affect the entire special operations community. The briefing concluded with General Hawthorne announcing immediate actions that would fundamentally alter Fort Kestrel's operations while protecting Alexis from retaliation that could result from her decision to provide classified information to Pentagon oversight. Effective immediately, Fort Kestrel will cease all precision training operations pending comprehensive review of methodology and personnel, she announced. This investigation will expand to include all aspects of the base's training effectiveness and reporting accuracy. The intervention Alexis had initiated through her courageous decision to challenge institutional authority would either validate her analysis and lead to reforms that could save lives, or expose her to consequences that could end her military career while protecting the systemic problems she'd tried to address. 3 days after, General Hawthorne suspended Fort Kestrel's precision training operations, the crisis that would test everything Alexis had argued about institutional competence exploded across the communication networks of every major military command center in the world. At 0347 hours local time, Karim Nazari and his Red Serpent terrorist organization had seized the Meridian chemical processing plant, taking 47 civilian hostages and threatening to release deadly toxins into the city's water supply unless their demands for prisoner releases were met within 12 hours. The facility's location in the heart of Meridian City's industrial sector created a tactical nightmare that conventional assault methods couldn't address. The chemical processing equipment contained substances that could kill thousands if released. The surrounding area was densely populated with civilians who couldn't be evacuated quickly enough, and Nazari had demonstrated through previous operations that he would execute hostages without hesitation if his demands weren't met. Fort Kestrel received emergency deployment orders at 0630 hours, directing Colonel Steele to provide precision sniper support for SEAL Team Neptune's assault on the chemical plant. The mission required exactly the kind of extreme-range accuracy under variable environmental conditions that Alexis's analysis had proven Fort Kestrel's training couldn't develop. But Pentagon crisis managers were operating under the assumption that the base's precision capabilities were what Colonel Steele had been reporting for the past 2 years. Captain Morrison found himself commanding a precision support mission for which his team was fundamentally unprepared, using equipment that had been degraded by inappropriate training methods. In an environment that demanded skills his rapid engagement protocols had never developed. The irony wasn't lost on Alexis that the institutional failures she documented were about to be tested under exactly the kind of high-stakes conditions where lives depended on competence that Fort Kestrel's training philosophy had systematically undermined. The tactical situation Morrison's team faced was a precision shooter's nightmare layered with complexities that required environmental awareness and patient observation skills that rapid engagement training actively discouraged. The chemical plant's industrial environment created thermal effects that changed atmospheric conditions every few minutes. Wind patterns were disrupted by the facility's cooling systems and exhaust stacks, and the urban setting provided multiple sight lines that demanded understanding ballistics principles no electronic system could calculate in real time. SEAL Team Neptune had infiltrated the facility's perimeter and established observation positions that revealed the scope of the tactical challenge they faced. Nazari had positioned his terrorists throughout the chemical processing areas with overlapping fields of fire that made conventional assault impossible without triggering the kind of firefight that could rupture containment systems and release toxic materials into the atmosphere. "Control Neptune lead," reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell through encrypted communications that revealed the desperate nature of the situation developing inside the chemical plant. Targets are positioned adjacent to primary containment vessels. Any missed shots or ricochets could compromise chemical storage systems. Require precision engagement capability with zero margin for error. But Morrison's team was attempting to provide precision support using methods that had never been tested under the kind of environmental conditions they were encountering at the chemical plant. Their electronic range-finding equipment was producing inconsistent readings due to thermal distortion from the facility's cooling systems. Their computerized ballistics calculations couldn't account for wind patterns that changed direction every few minutes, and their rapid engagement training had created muscle memory that worked against the patient observation required for understanding how environmental variables affected bullet trajectory. The first engagement opportunity came when Nazari positioned one of his lieutenants near a primary chemical storage tank, creating a situation where Neptune team could advance if the terrorist could be eliminated without damaging the containment system. The shot required precision at 847 meters through industrial haze with crosswinds that were shifting unpredictably as thermal effects from the processing equipment created atmospheric disturbances. Morrison's lead shooter, Sergeant First Class David Park, had performed similar shots dozens of times during Fort Kestrel, training exercises under controlled conditions with predictable environmental variables. But the chemical plant environment demanded adaptive capability that rapid engagement protocols had never developed, requiring him to interpret environmental cues that his electronic systems couldn't measure and make ballistics adjustments based on atmospheric conditions his training had taught him to ignore. Park's first shot missed by 8 inches to the left, the bullet impacting the concrete wall inches from the chemical storage tank while alerting Nazari's forces to the precision threat they faced. The miss wasn't the result of equipment failure or an inadequate marksmanship training. It was the inevitable consequence of attempting to make precision shots using methods that prioritize speed over environmental awareness and technological solutions over the patient observation that extreme range accuracy actually required. "Control, Overwatch 1, Morrison reported with growing desperation as his team's limitations became apparent under field conditions that exposed every deficiency in their training. Environmental conditions are affecting ballistics calculations. Requesting updated meteorological data and technical support for equipment calibration. But the technical support Morrison was requesting couldn't address the fundamental problem his team faced. Their training had created dependence on electronic systems that couldn't account for environmental variables that experienced precision shooters learned to read through direct observation and fieldcraft. They needed skills that Fort Kestrel's rapid engagement protocols had systematically discouraged in favor of technological solutions that were proving inadequate for the complex atmospheric conditions they were encountering. The situation deteriorated rapidly as Nazari's forces responded to the missed shot by repositioning hostages to locations that made precision engagement even more challenging. The terrorists had training and experience that enabled them to exploit the urban industrial environment in ways that frustrated conventional tactical approaches, and they clearly understood that the precision threat they faced was limited by technological dependence rather than adaptive capability. General Hawthorne monitored the developing crisis from the Pentagon's Joint Operations Center, watching real-time intelligence feeds that revealed the consequences of institutional problems she'd been investigating since the Desert Storm Challenge failure. Fort Kestrel's premier precision unit was failing under exactly the kind of conditions where their supposed elite training should have provided decisive tactical advantage. "Situation report from Meridian," she requested from the operations officer, coordinating federal response to the chemical plant crisis. "How are our precision assets performing against the terrorist positions?" The response confirmed what Alexis's analysis had predicted about Fort Kestrel's actual capability versus reported performance. Morrison's team was struggling with environmental conditions that competent precision shooters should have been able to adapt to routinely. Their equipment was functioning properly, but their training hadn't prepared them to interpret the data their systems were providing. And their rapid engagement methodology was proving counterproductive for situations that required patient observation and environmental awareness. 3 hours into the crisis, SEAL Team Neptune remained pinned in their infiltration positions while Morrison's team attempted unsuccessfully to provide the precision support that could enable tactical advancement. Every missed shot revealed additional limitations in Fort Kestrel's training effectiveness, and each failure to adapt to environmental conditions confirmed that Colonel Steele's rapid engagement protocols had created exactly the kind of technological dependence that made operators ineffective when electronic solutions weren't sufficient. The chemical plant crisis was becoming a real-world validation of everything Alexis had documented about institutional training failures, but the consequences were measured in hostage lives and potential civilian casualties that could result from continued mission failure. Morrison's team wasn't just struggling with technical challenges, they were discovering that their training had prepared them for artificial range conditions, rather than the variable environments where special operations actually occurred. In Fort Kestrel's armory basement, Alexis monitored the crisis communications through her concealed radio equipment while understanding that she possessed exactly the skills that could resolve the tactical situation Morrison's team couldn't handle. Her 8 years with Delta Force had included missions in similar industrial environments requiring precision shots through atmospheric disturbances that electronic systems couldn't calculate, and her training emphasized environmental awareness over technological dependence, but revealing her capabilities would expose the classified background that had been protected through 18 months of careful concealment, potentially compromising ongoing operations while definitively ending the cover identity that had enabled her investigation into Fort Kestrel's institutional problems. The decision she faced was whether to maintain her concealment while watching a mission fail, or reveal herself to provide the precision capability that could save hostage lives and prevent the chemical catastrophe that Nazari was threatening. Woman they'd relegated to cleaning weapons was about to face the ultimate test of whether institutional courage was more important than personal security, when everything depended on someone having the skills to make shots that rapid engagement training had proven incapable of achieving. The moment of decision came when Alexis heard Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's voice cut through the tactical communications with the desperation of someone watching a mission collapse in real time. Control. Neptune lead. We have visual on terrorist leader positioning explosive charges adjacent to primary chemical storage. Estimate 6 minutes until potential containment breach. Require immediate precision engagement or recommend mission. Abort with civilian evacuation. But civilian evacuation wasn't possible in the time remaining, and mission abort would mean 47 hostages dead and a chemical catastrophe that could kill thousands more. Morrison's team had attempted 3 more precision shots in the past hour, each miss revealing additional limitations in their training while allowing Nazari's forces to strengthen their defensive positions and accelerate their timeline for executing hostages and releasing toxic materials. Alexis understood that the institutional failure she documented was about to result in exactly the kind of catastrophic outcome that proper training could prevent. Morrison's team possessed superior equipment and extensive preparation, but they lacked the environmental awareness and patient observation skills that extreme-range precision shooting actually required. They were failing not because the mission was impossible, but because Fort Kestrel's training had never prepared them for the adaptive thinking that real-world conditions demanded. The decision to reveal herself came when Staff Sergeant Walsh appeared in the armory basement with orders from General Hawthorne that changed everything Alexis thought she understood about her situation at Fort Kestrel. "Ma'am, the General requests your immediate presence in the Tactical Operations Center," Walsh said, her expression indicating that the pretense of concealment was finally ending. "She says it's time to stop cleaning weapons and start using them properly." The walk to Fort Kestrel's operations center felt like emerging from 18 months of enforced invisibility into a world where her actual capabilities were not just acknowledged but desperately needed. General Hawthorne had arrived during the crisis and established direct command of the response operation, bringing with her classified knowledge of Alexis's true background and authority to override Colonel Steele's objections to involving personnel he considered administratively insignificant. "Lieutenant Colonel Thorne," General Hawthorne said, using Alexis's actual rank for the first time since her arrival at Fort Kestrel, "we have a precision shooting problem that rapid engagement training can't solve. I need someone with environmental awareness and adaptive capability to make shots that electronic systems can't calculate. Are you prepared to demonstrate why traditional methods work better than technological dependence?" The tactical briefing revealed the full scope of the challenge that had defeated Morrison's team and threatened to result in mission failure with catastrophic consequences. The chemical plant's industrial environment created atmospheric conditions that changed continuously as thermal effects from processing equipment interacted with urban wind patterns in ways that no computerized ballistic system could predict or compensate for in real time. Nazari had positioned his forces with sophisticated understanding of how the facility's environment would frustrate precision shooting attempts, using the chemical storage areas as both defensive positions and leverage for threatening civilian casualties if the assault continued. The terrorist leader had military training that enabled him to exploit the tactical situation in ways that conventional special operations approaches couldn't overcome, but Alexis recognized patterns in the tactical situation that Morrison's team had never learned to see. Her Delta Force training had emphasized reading environmental systems as integrated wholes rather than collections of individual variables, understanding how thermal effects and wind patterns created opportunities for precision shots that appeared impossible to operators focused on electronic solutions and rapid engagement protocols. The facility's cooling system creates thermal columns that rise predictably every 4 minutes, she explained while studying satellite imagery and meteorological data that revealed the environmental patterns Morrison's team had been fighting rather than adapting to. Wind patterns shift with those thermal cycles, creating brief windows where atmospheric conditions stabilize enough for precision engagement beyond 800 meters. The analysis demonstrated why Fort Kestrel's training had failed to prepare operators for real-world conditions. Morrison's team had been taught to overcome environmental variables through technological solutions, rather than learning to work with natural systems that followed patterns discoverable through patient observation and environmental awareness. Colonel Steele's presence in the operations center created tension that reflected the broader institutional crisis his training methods had created. Watching his supposedly elite unit fail while an equipment maintenance specialist provided tactical solutions that his rapid engagement protocols had never developed challenged everything he'd built his reputation defending. "General, with respect, we shouldn't be consulting maintenance personnel about precision shooting operations," Steele objected, his voice carrying the defensive anger of someone watching his institutional authority collapse under the weight of demonstrated incompetence. "Morrison's team has advanced training and superior equipment. They just need time to adapt their techniques to local conditions." But there was no time for adaptation, and Morrison's techniques were based on training methods that made environmental adaptation impossible rather than instinctive. General Hawthorne's response ended the pretense that had protected Alexis's cover identity while revealing why her assignment to Fort Kestrel had never been the administrative exile it appeared to represent. "Colonel Steele, meet Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thorne, callsign Ghost, formerly Delta Force's most effective precision operator, and currently the person who documented every failure your training methods would produce under exactly these conditions," General Hawthorne announced. "Her 18 months maintaining your weapons provided the evidence we needed to understand why rapid engagement training creates technological dependence that fails when environmental adaptation is required." The revelation transformed the tactical operations center as personnel who dismissed Basement Betty realized they'd been working alongside someone whose operational background made Morrison's team look like enthusiastic amateurs. Alexis's true identity explained why her equipment maintenance had been so sophisticated, why her understanding of weapon systems exceeded what administrative personnel typically possessed, and most importantly, why she'd been able to predict the institutional failures they were witnessing in real time. The precision shot that would resolve the crisis required everything Morrison's team had never learned about environmental awareness and patient observation. Nazari had positioned himself near the primary chemical storage area where thermal effects created atmospheric disturbances that changed direction every few minutes, demanding ballistics calculations that accounted for variables no electronic system could measure in real time. Alexis's preparation for the shot demonstrated the fundamental differences between traditional precision shooting methods and the rapid engagement protocols that had failed throughout the mission. Instead of relying on electronic systems, she read environmental conditions through direct observation that integrated thermal patterns, wind indicators, and atmospheric pressure changes into a comprehensive understanding of how conditions would affect bullet trajectory. The shot itself was a masterpiece of environmental adaptation and patient timing that vindicated everything her analysis had argued about the superiority of traditional methods over technological dependence. At 1,247 meters through shifting atmospheric conditions that had defeated multiple electronic calculations, Alexis waited for the precise moment when thermal cycles aligned to create the brief window of stability necessary for precision engagement. The bullet found its target with the kind of accuracy that demonstrated not just superior marksmanship, but understanding of environmental systems that rapid engagement training had systematically discouraged. Nazari's elimination enabled Neptune Team's successful assault on the chemical facility, saving 47 hostages and preventing the civilian catastrophe that mission failure would have produced. The immediate aftermath of the crisis became a comprehensive validation of everything Alexis had documented about institutional training effectiveness and the consequences of prioritizing rapid engagement over environmental awareness. Morrison's team had failed using superior equipment and extensive preparation because their training emphasized technological solutions over the adaptive thinking that real-world conditions required. General Hawthorne's transformation of Fort Kestrel began immediately, with Alexis appointed as the new director of precision training operations and Morrison's team enrolled in comprehensive retraining that emphasized environmental awareness over electronic dependence. Colonel Steele found himself reassigned to administrative duties that would prevent him from influencing future training development, while his rapid engagement protocols were abandoned in favor of methods that produced operators capable of adapting to variable conditions. The institutional changes extended far beyond Fort Kestrel, as General Hawthorne used Alexis's analysis and the chemical plant mission results to justify comprehensive reforms throughout the special operations community. Traditional precision shooting methods that emphasized environmental awareness and patient observation became standard doctrine, while rapid engagement training was relegated to specific applications where technological dependence didn't create mission-critical limitations. 6 months later, Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thorne stood before a new class of precision shooting candidates in a facility that had been completely redesigned to emphasize environmental awareness over electronic systems, patient observation over rapid engagement, and adaptive thinking over technological dependence. The woman they'd once called Basement Betty had become the architect of training reforms that would influence military effectiveness for generations. Her grandfather's hunting wisdom, filtered through 8 years of Delta Force operations and validated through 18 months of documenting institutional failures, had proven that the most important military virtues couldn't be replaced by superior equipment or aggressive confidence. Sometimes the most revolutionary act was remembering what had always worked and having the courage to defend it. When institutional pressure demanded abandoning proven methods for impressive innovations that failed when lives depended on competence rather than confidence, the chemical plant crisis had demonstrated that true professional expertise came from understanding systems rather than operating equipment, from reading environments rather than depending on electronics, and from developing patience rather than prioritizing speed. Alexis's impossible shot had saved 47 lives, but her institutional courage had potentially saved thousands more. By ensuring that future operators would be trained for reality rather than for the comfortable illusions that had nearly resulted in catastrophic failure when everything depended on making the perfect decision at the perfect moment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.